The deployment order that the Pentagon issued Tuesday for elements of the 82nd Airborne Division to deploy to the Middle East is not a contingency plan being developed for potential future use. It is written orders directing approximately 2,000 to 3,000 paratroopers from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, to begin deploying within days to a theater where the United States is simultaneously claiming productive negotiations are producing imminent diplomatic breakthrough, and where Iran is categorically denying that negotiations of any kind are occurring. The contradiction between deploying additional ground combat forces and claiming that talks are approaching successful resolution cannot be explained by normal civil-military coordination lag or operational security requirements. It describes a decision-making structure where the diplomatic track and the military track are operating from incompatible assessments of what is actually happening. I'm Dr. Michael Harrington, and now we're going to look carefully at what is happening in and around the Strait of Hormuz, what is confirmed, what is still uncertain, and what comes next. Before we begin, a quick disclaimer. This video is for informational and educational purposes only and is not financial, legal, or investment advice. I'm analyzing publicly available information, and events may change. Please do your own research and consult professionals before making decisions. If you're finding value in this analysis, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. The 15-point peace proposal that Trump administration officials delivered to Iran through Pakistani intermediaries, as reported by the New York Times, NBC News, and multiple other outlets citing sources familiar with the document, has been confirmed received by Tehran. What has not been confirmed is that Iran considers the proposal anything other than what a senior Iranian diplomatic source described to Al Jazeera as extremely maximalist and unreasonable. Iran's counterproposal, published Wednesday by Iranian state broadcaster Press TV, contains 5 conditions that functionally reject the American framework entirely, while establishing Iranian demands that the United States has shown zero willingness to accept. The gap between what Trump characterizes as 15 points of agreement and what Iran describes as an unreasonable American proposal requiring a complete Iranian counteroffer is not a negotiating distance that back-channel communications can bridge. It is a fundamental divergence on what is being discussed and whether discussions constitute negotiations. Iran's 5 conditions, as published by Press TV citing a senior political security official with knowledge of the proposal details, are structured to ensure that any agreement preserves Iranian strategic gains from 3 weeks of conflict, while preventing the United States from reimposing war at a moment of its choosing. Complete halt to aggression and assassinations by the enemy. Establishment of concrete mechanisms to ensure the war is not reimposed on the Islamic Republic. Guaranteed and clearly defined payment of war damages and reparations. Conclusion of the war across all fronts and for all resistance groups involved throughout the region. Iran's exercise of sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz as Iran's natural and legal right, constituting a guarantee for implementation of commitments and must be recognized. The 5th condition, Iranian sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz, is the one that structurally prevents any agreement based on the framework Trump has been describing. Trump's entire public justification for postponing power plant strikes was that Iran would reopen the waterway. Iran's counterproposal does not offer to reopen it. It demands recognition of Iranian sovereignty over it as a precondition for any agreement. That is not a negotiating position designed to reach the middle ground between American demands and Iranian interests. It is a position designed to demonstrate that Iran considers the strait leverage it will not surrender without obtaining everything else it is demanding, including reparations for war damages, mechanisms preventing future American attacks, and cessation of operations across all regional fronts, including Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, and Syria, where Iranian-aligned forces are engaged. Fars news agency, the semi-official outlet that functions as the Revolutionary Guard's communications platform, stated Wednesday that Iran does not accept a ceasefire, and that entering such a process with parties who violate agreements is not logical. The source told Fars that Iran intends to realize its strategic goals in the war, and only when that happens will there be possibility of ending the conflict. That formulation places the timeline for any resolution not on Trump's 5-day extension expiring Friday, but on Iran's assessment of when its strategic objectives have been achieved through continued military operations. The operational tempo Iran is maintaining suggests that assessment has not yet been reached. Iran launched multiple missile and drone waves Wednesday, striking Israeli cities, American bases, and Gulf energy infrastructure in what has become the sustained operational pattern of this conflict. The 82nd Airborne Division deployment order includes the division commander, Major General Brandon Tegmeyer, division staff, and elements of the 1st Brigade Combat Team currently serving as the division's immediate response force. The IRF designation means these units are maintained at readiness levels, allowing deployment anywhere globally within 18 hours of receiving orders. The fact that written deployment orders have been issued, that the division commander is being sent, and that specific battalions have been identified for movement describes something beyond contingency planning. These are execution orders for an operational deployment. The Pentagon confirmed Wednesday that elements of 82nd Airborne Division Headquarters, Division Enablers, and the 1st BCT will be deploying to the Central Command Area of Responsibility, declining to provide additional details citing operational security. The deployment, combined with the approximately 4,700 Marines already en route aboard the USS Boxer, USS Tripoli, and USS New Orleans, will place between 6,000 and 8,000 American ground combat troops in the Persian Gulf region over the next 2 weeks. That force level is not sufficient for large-scale territorial occupation or sustained urban combat operations across Iran's geographic expanse. It is sufficient for specific high-value target seizures, raids requiring forced entry into contested areas, and operations designed to create leverage for negotiations through demonstrating the capacity and will to put American forces on Iranian soil. The operational profile that deployment suggests is not defensive positioning to protect existing bases. It is offensive capability being positioned for missions requiring ground force projection. Kharg Island, located approximately 15 miles off Iran's southern coast, processes 90% of Iranian crude oil exports according to open-source assessments. The island's infrastructure includes loading terminals, storage facilities, and the connecting pipelines that move Iranian oil from inland fields to tankers in the Gulf. Seizing Kharg would give the United States control over Iran's primary oil export mechanism, creating the kind of economic leverage that might force Iranian concessions on Hormuz reopening or other American objectives. That operational concept has been discussed in multiple media reports, citing defense officials familiar with planning discussions. The problem with the Kharg seizure concept, as multiple military analysts have noted, is that the island sits 15 miles from Iranian territory. Any American force occupying it would be under continuous bombardment from rockets, drones, missiles, and potentially artillery fire from coastal positions. Holding the island would require continuous air cover, robust air defense, regular resupply under fire, and acceptance of casualties that accumulate daily rather than during the initial assault phase. Alex Plitzis, an analyst with the Atlantic Council, stated on social media that the force being deployed is not sufficient for a major invasion nor to hold a single city, and indicates limited targeted ops only. That assessment describes operations with defined tactical objectives, rapid execution timelines, and planned extraction, rather than sustained presence. Raid-style operations against nuclear facilities, command centers, or other high-value targets. Seizure and brief occupation of critical nodes to demonstrate capability before withdrawal. Missions designed to create shock effects and degrade specific Iranian capabilities without requiring the long-term force presence that sustained occupation demands. All of these operational concepts share a common feature. They require putting American ground forces under fire in Iranian territory or offshore locations within range of Iranian weapons, accepting casualties to achieve tactical objectives, and executing extraction before Iranian response overwhelms defensive capabilities. The casualty question is the one that has not been adequately addressed in public discussion of ground operations. The United States has lost 13 service members killed in this conflict, according to official counts, with 6 dying in a KC-135 crash over Iraq and 6 killed in the Iranian strike on a makeshift operations center in Kuwait. An additional soldier died from injuries sustained in an attack on Saudi Arabia. Those deaths occurred primarily in rear area facilities and aircraft operating at distances from Iranian territory that were supposed to provide security margins. Ground forces conducting raids into or near Iranian territory will be operating without those security margins, executing missions where Iranian defensive fire is the expected operational environment, rather than an unfortunate exception. The casualty rates that raid operations against defended targets typically produce are documented in military history and doctrine. They are not low. Trump's statement Wednesday that "we've won this because this war has been won," while simultaneously ordering additional ground troops to deploy, describes the same pattern of declared victory, contradicted by operational escalation, that has characterized his public communications throughout this conflict. We're not winning a war where they have no navy, and they have no air force, and they have no nothing, and we literally have planes flying over Tehran, Trump stated in the Oval Office. That characterization was delivered on a day when Iran launched its 73rd wave of attacks, when the 82nd Airborne received deployment orders, when Iranian officials published counterproposals rejecting American peace terms, and when oil prices climbed back above $100 per barrel on market assessment that the conflict shows no signs of resolution. The death toll continues to accumulate across every dimension of this conflict. Iran's deputy permanent representative to the International Maritime Organization stated Wednesday that more than 1,750 people have been killed in Iran since the war began. The U.S.-based human rights activist news agency reports at least 1,455 civilians killed in Iran, including 217 children, with 1,167 military personnel killed and 669 fatalities classified as undetermined. Lebanon's health ministry updated its figures Wednesday to at least 1,094 people killed in Israeli strikes since March 2nd, with 121 children among the dead. Iraq has lost 96 people, including 7 Iraqi service members killed Wednesday in an attack on a defense ministry clinic. 13 American service members have been killed. The cumulative humanitarian cost is approaching 2,500 deaths across the region in 26 days. The economic disruption that Trump's postponement was supposed to address through diplomatic breakthrough has instead intensified. Shell CEO Wael Sawan stated at the CERAWeek Energy Conference in Texas that energy shortages could hit Europe starting next month if the war does not end. The conflict has already reduced jet fuel supplies, with diesel and gasoline shortages projected to follow. Germany's economic minister issued similar warnings. The International Energy Agency's characterization of this as the largest supply disruption in oil market history is being validated by market behavior and industry projections, rather than contradicted by diplomatic progress. Sri Lanka ordered streetlights, neon signs, and billboard lighting switched off as part of measures to cut energy consumption by 25%. The Philippines declared a state of national emergency due to imminent danger to energy supply stability. These are not temporary conservation measures awaiting market correction. These are emergency government interventions in response to structural supply crisis. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi encouraged Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi in a Wednesday phone call to engage in talks with the United States as soon as possible to end the war. "Talking is always better than fighting," Wang stated according to Chinese government readout. The fact that China, Iran's primary economic partner and diplomatic supporter, is publicly encouraging Tehran to negotiate suggests Beijing's assessment that continued conflict threatens Chinese interests more than any outcome achievable through Iranian military operations. Approximately 80% of China's oil imports transit the Strait of Hormuz. The waterway's closure affects Chinese economic planning in ways that ideological alignment with Iran cannot compensate for. Wang's statement is China attempting to shape Iranian decision-making through diplomatic pressure while maintaining the public position of opposing American aggression. Hezbollah leader Naim Qassem rejected talks with Israel Wednesday, while Lebanon remains under fire, describing any negotiation under current conditions as forced surrender. Israel's defense minister Israel Katz stated Tuesday that Israel will establish a security zone in southern Lebanon, extending to the Litani River, and maintain control until Hezbollah's threat is eliminated. That Israeli objective, indefinite occupation of southern Lebanese territory, and Hezbollah's stated refusal to negotiate while under attack, describe a Lebanon front that has no visible path to resolution, regardless of what happens between the United States and Iran. The regional conflict has fragmented into parallel tracks that would each require separate resolution processes, even if the primary U.S.-Iran confrontation produced a ceasefire framework. The summary of what Day 26 of this conflict produced is not evidence of diplomatic breakthrough approaching successful conclusion. It is evidence of parallel escalation, where American deployment of ground combat forces proceeds simultaneously with claims of productive negotiations that Iran denies are occurring, where peace proposals are exchanged through intermediaries, with neither side accepting the other's framework, where Trump declares victory while casualty counts approach 2,500 regional deaths, and where the economic crisis producing emergency government interventions globally is described by industry and international organizations as worse than any energy disruption in half a century. The 15-point proposal and the 5-point counterproposal are not positions separated by negotiable distance. They are incompatible frameworks for ending a conflict where one side demands the other reopen a strategic waterway without conditions, while the other side demands recognition of sovereignty over that same waterway as precondition for any agreement. Friday arrives in 2 days. Trump's 5-day extension of the power plant strike threat expires. The 82nd Airborne begins deploying. The Marines continue their transit, and the question of what happens when the deadline reaches zero for the second time is one that neither Trump's characterization of imminent breakthrough nor Iran's published counterdemands provides a clear answer to. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. When Friday's deadline expires and the decision whether to execute previously threatened strikes or issue a third postponement reaches the point where it can no longer be deferred, the analysis will be here. When the 82nd Airborne deployment reaches the Gulf and the operational concepts requiring American ground forces under Iranian fire move from planning to execution, the analysis will be here. When the gap between declared victory and operational escalation produces consequences that public communications can no longer contain, the analysis will be here. This channel documents what officials say, what the evidence shows, and what the incompatibility between those two things reveals about decision-making operating without coherent integration between diplomatic claims and military actions. Leave one question in the comments. When an administration deploys thousands of additional ground combat troops to a theater while simultaneously claiming negotiations are producing imminent peace agreement, which action more accurately describes what decision-makers actually expect to happen next? Every response gets read.